Hello, my name is Paul Jones, author of Concerning a Nation and several videos on Bible prophecy. If you're interested in prophecy, you will know that part of Daniel is written in an ancient language called Aramaic, from chapter 2 halfway through verse 4 to the end of chapter 7. And if you ask anyone who fancies himself as a prophecy buff why, you'll be told that this is because the passage is written to all the people of the world, Aramaic being the lingua franca of the Babylonian Empire, which is true enough, but at the same time rather glib. There are references in the Aramaic chapters to all the people of the known world, to be sure, but there are difficulties here. Aramaic was, as stated, the common language of the time, the official script in which government pronouncements would be made to all the people of the known world. So far, so good. Now here's the problem. This passage was written apparently for all the people of the world at the time. But who would have read it? The book of Daniel was written, presumably much later than the events described in it, by the scholar and linguist Daniel himself. But it was placed in and remained part of the Jewish canon. No one would have read it apart from the Jews. Most of the Gentile people of the empire would have been illiterate anyway. They could listen to the proclamations and decrees of the kings mentioned in the chapters, but that doesn't explain why Daniel wrote it in Aramaic. And furthermore, the passages contain strange images and references to the future which would have made no sense to anyone at the time, especially not heathens. It barely makes sense to us. So the question remains, why was part of it written in Aramaic? Now, we know the differences, which are that the Hebrew passages, chapter 8 to 12, contain prophecies which pertain to the Jews, Jerusalem and the temple, whereas the Aramaic passages contain general strictures about recognizing the King of Heaven, as opposed to false gods, magicians and astrologers. Fine. There are also the prophecies of the statue and the animals of chapter 2 and 7, by the way, which are basically the same as those in Hebrew chapter 11. Now, most of the prophecy writers today tell us that this Aramaic writing has a message for us in the Gentile Christian era. They believe that we are in the end times and that these prophecies are unfolding now. I've dealt with a lot of this nonsense in my book and my other videos. The glib response that the Aramaic parts are for the whole modern world makes no sense, because Aramaic and the whole world that spoke it have gone. The lingua franca of the modern world is English. No one would have read it at the time. Nobody reads Aramaic now. One might be tempted flippantly to ask why, if it is for us today, it was not written in English. After all, the Bible is a miraculous work which tells the future. It contains things which may have been unintelligible at the time of writing, especially in Daniel. It isn't written in English, of course, for the same reason that it makes no references to television, tanks and aircraft carriers. See my book and previous video on technology. The time we live in is not mentioned in the Bible. Now, one of God's great miracles of the modern age is the renaissance of Hebrew. It has become, amazingly, in just a few decades, a living language again. Not only that, but Israel is now a vibrant technological superpower and a significant player in modern global communications. Gradually, Israel is moving to the centre of world events again. If these prophecies of Daniel pertain to the modern age, more people living today speak Hebrew than Aramaic. Why not just leave it in that language? Why not write it all in Hebrew? By the time of the New Testament, when the gospel began to spread to the Gentiles, Aramaic was no longer the official international language of anywhere. The Gospels were written in Greek, the lingua franca of the eastern half of the Roman Empire. The Bible was then translated into Latin, the Vulgate, and then, after many centuries and much persecution, into the languages of Western Europe, including the world's most important language of today, English. And to this day, when you and I read the book of Daniel, we read both the Hebrew and Aramaic parts in English. So the fact that it's in Aramaic is what? just a clue to the widespread application to Gentiles? But no, the clue that it's for the whole world is in the wording or the references. I repeat, if these prophecies apply to the modern age, then they could just as easily have been translated into English from Hebrew as Aramaic. Moreover, the Bible is full of prophecies for the Jews of Jesus and for the end times. They're always written in Hebrew or Greek, so what is so special about these chapters? You might point out that many of the younger Jews of the captivity spoke Aramaic and didn't know their own tongue. Well, possibly, so why not write it all in Aramaic? It's not as if the Hebrew part is for older people and the Aramaic part is for the young. The difference is not based on that. The difference is that one is aimed at Gentiles and one at Jews. If the Hebrew parts are meant for the Jews for all time, then for whom is the Aramaic part meant, when no one in the empire would have read it or understood it? And now that Aramaic is gone the way of all flesh, what lasting purpose do these passages have? So, just to hammer it home, no one read it then, and no one reads Aramaic now. Here's the explanation. In my book and one of my previous videos, I named the two beasts of Revelation. They are the Assyrian king Sennacherib and Judas. And they will return, as will the tribes and tongues of the ancient world. Now, if you're familiar with the Bible, you will know that one of Sennacherib's predecessors was called Tiglath-Pileser III. He's mentioned in the second book of the Kings as one of the Assyrian invaders of the Holy Land. He's also responsible for something else. He made Aramaic the official language of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Interesting to note, incidentally, that Britain and America were not the only consecutive empires in history who used the same language. Obviously, the Neo-Assyrians and Babylonians spoke Aramaic. Later on, Darius the Great made Aramaic the official language of the Medo-Persian Empire, but that was long after the Jews had returned to their homeland. This language was quite a significant tongue at one time, and for many years. Now, if the Neo-Assyrian Empire spoke Aramaic, then Sennacherib would have written and spoken it, just like Judas many hundreds of years later. Now you will say, don't languages change over 700 years or so? Well, certainly. But go back 700 years in English and you'll encounter Geoffrey Chaucer, who wrote the Canterbury Tales. Very different from modern English, to be sure, but most educated people could easily read it still. So even given that Judas and Jesus spoke a dialect, it is essentially the same language spoken by Sennacherib, otherwise it would have a different name. If the people of these ancient empires had read these chapters, they would have barely understood the complex imagery. But when the ancient world returns and Aramaic is revived, these prophecies will not be impenetrable mysteries and figures. They will be unfolding before people's eyes. The worship of great images and idols, fake priests, sinister magic and persecutions of God's people. And those who speak Aramaic may listen either to the wisdom and warnings of Daniel or to the two beasts of Revelation. It will all make sense, and the warnings will be clear. Thank you for watching, and God bless you all. Please read my book Concerning a Nation, published by Lulu. Thank you again.